Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Further Comments. We are starting this one with an actual name for the episode, which is going to be I Know What You Did Last Miami. Damien, Stephanie, I think you know what I'm talking about because I'm the only one on this call who wasn't there.
No, I wasn't this year. I was there the previous year. So,
you know what I did in Miami, but what happens in Miami may stay in Miami, unless TLTF, which is for the uninitiated, what we're talking about, that happened in Miami is the Legaltech Fund conference. It is one of my favorite conferences of the year, largely because I gauge whether a conference is good by the percentage of conversations that are interesting. I would say that large conferences whose names I'm not going to say is maybe 20, 30, 40% interesting conversations and a lot of pablum. TLTF is like 98, 99%, close to 100% really interesting conversation because it's invite only. So they've curated the people. It's all C-suite folks and it's all people in legal tech that know what they're talking about, the law firm people that know what they're talking about, and corporate people that know what they're talking about. So where other conferences are filled with muggles, this is filled with wizards.
I feel dirty because the first word that came to my mind was mudblood. And that is not what we want to be talking about here. But we've forgotten a very important part of this podcast, which is Stephanie Wilkins. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
One of the smartest people on the planet, has been writing about legal tech for a long time, one of the smartest brains and part of Bob Ambrosi's Friday podcast. And then, of course, joining the Legal Tech Hub, doing really cool things for content. So people with the ear to the ground on what's happening in legal tech, Stephanie is among the pinnacle of that.
Yeah, I try to be. I'm very, very used to being ear to the ground. That's for sure.
Well, we're so happy to have you because this episode is where we're going to look back on 2024 and also look forward to 2025. Damien, what has been the highlight for you in 2024? Because we're going to start with that. And I think I know what you're going to say.
It's funny. I don't know what I'm going to say, but I will start out by saying in 2023, December of 23, I was with Jay and Dan Katz and a few other really smart people. And I said in December of 23, I said, wow, 2023 was a crazy year. Is 24 going to be less crazy or more crazy? And they said, oh, it's going to be more crazy. Like we're just starting the exponential. And I would say that Jay and Dan, most of the time they were right. And they're certainly right in this instance. I would posit the same question. 24 was a crazy year. Is 25 going to be an even crazier year? Or are we going to reach a asymptote? Or are we going to continue doing exponentials? So anyway, so 24 was a weird year and a good year. I would say that we have made our way maybe through the trough of disillusionment. I've seen many in-house corporate clients and also law firms really doing the hard yards of being able to build really cool things. Once you start doing the hard yards of doing actual useful things, I think we're on the slope of enlightenment. So I would say that's my highlight of 24 is seeing the really cool use cases and people actually doing useful things. So I would kick it back to Horace and Stephanie. What have you seen in 24 that you're happy about?
I'm going to throw to Stephanie because that was not my prediction for you, Damien.
Okay. I mean, well, one of my highlights was seeing Damien sing on stage for a long time. That was 2024 greatness right there. No, but I agree. I mean, I don't know that I would say 2024 was crazier than 2023. It was just different crazy. It was just as crazy. I definitely agree that the conversation has matured a lot more in 2024 than it had in 2023. And that makes me very happy. I do worry that the gap between those have moved over to the slope of enlightenment, and the gap that are still over here in the trough of disillusionment or even earlier than that is widening, which is not a great thing. But all in all, I think it's heading in the right direction. And that makes me happy and makes me feel positive about where we're going in legal tech.
That kind of gap is a great thing for the people that are ahead, not great for the people that are behind, but maybe pretty good for the winners, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I don't know if the gap is a big issue, right? Because the speed at which you can climb the curve is accelerating. So yeah, you're 6 months behind, but you're going at twice the speed as people who are 6 months ahead of you. So maybe it's not an issue.
Yeah.
You just have to want to climb.
Now that's an interesting statement because I think there's a lot of people in the market who don't want to climb.
Right.
I was on lunch just now, and one of the questions was, what are we seeing in terms of adoption? Are people wanting adoption? What's the percentage of people who are trying the more advanced legal tech, and not just Gen AI, but just advanced legal tech? And we settled on it's the 80-20 rule. There are 20% of people who are doing the actual experimentation, trying, adopting, and the other 80% are not doing it, but the 20% who are doing it are taking up 80% of the airtime.
Yeah.
That's right. Horace, you've not said what you like about 24, and you've also said not what you thought I was going to say. So let's hear both of those things.
So, Damien, I thought you were going to be talking about generative AI being the most exciting thing, and I know it's 2 years old, but the difference is, as you're saying, it's actually starting to get traction. It's actually starting to find use cases. Still no killer use case in inverted commas, but starting to see where you can make a difference with this technology more than just marketing, more than just innovation by press release. So that was what I expected. You were just going to talk about the technology side rather than the business side.
I see. Well, that kind of goes without saying. So I didn't say it because it goes without saying.
Well, I'm going to share my most exciting thing about 2024, and that is the number of people in law firms who have now tried and are starting to go, okay, I have found 1 or 2 use cases where I can see this technology making a difference. And I think the key words for me there are making a difference. Whereas in 2023, I think there was still a lot more doubt among lawyers, not among the technologists. Now there are more people saying, yes, this can make a difference. Yes, I will think about adopting it. So that attitude shift is, I think, what's really quite cool about the last 12 months.
I think some of that has to do with expectations having been managed also. I mean, I think fewer people are, just expecting this easy button, or maybe they were expecting these grand use cases where people are realizing that small wins are still great wins and building from there.
Yeah. I think that's right, and there's what's needed politically, and there's what's needed technically, and the small wins are definitely needed politically. That is, you need to be able to have a cohort of power users, and this is the 80-20 rule, right? You have 20% of the power users that can be able to test it out, take some lumps and be able to do the hard yards of doing the work. But then when you have a win there, then they can publicize it to the other 80% and be able to then politically be able to get the goodwill to be able to do workflow number 2, work through number 10, et cetera, and kind of expand out that way. So that land and expand kind of aspect is definitely important politically, even though it's not really necessary technically for a lot of the use cases. The beauty of large language models is you just ask, what magical thing do you want to happen? And it makes magical things happen. Extract all of the X, Y's, and Z's from the document, and it'll pull all the X, Y's, and Z's out of the document. Where in the old world, you would have to specify, well, let's just start small with just the X's. And if X's go well, then we're going to go to Y's. And if Y's go well, then we go to Z's, right? So you technically in the past needed to do X first and then expand that way. But technically you could do X, Y, and Z and the 25 other things, and the technology will accommodate that breadth. So I say, yes, we need to land and expand with the small wins politically, even though we don't technically.
I love that we're calling, circa 2020 the old world now.
It's true.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's pre-ChatGPT and there's post-ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take what Damien you just said in a slightly different direction, and I'm going to hand this question over to Stephanie, which is, of all the different technologies and products that have been released in 2024, are you seeing a pattern for what is actually being adopted and what is actually making a difference?
I think the pattern is not necessarily in terms of, this sort of solution is the thing that's being adopted. I think it's how it's marketed and targeted, and if it's thought about. I mean, people who are approaching adoption and implementation through, this is the problem I want to solve, it might not be the problem you want to solve. I think the pattern is more that successful adoption is following thoughtful selections and implementations, which is not rocket science. That's how it should have always been. And I just think people sort of lost sight of that for a little while in all the excitement. So whether or not it's this CLM product or this legal research tool or whatever, I think it's less about that and more about people figuring out that their answer is theirs alone and not necessarily keeping up with their neighbor in terms of solution for solution what they're using.
That's really interesting. At lunch today, what we were saying was the dust is only starting to get settled on that. Like the winners and losers have not yet been picked, but we're starting to see hints of who we think are going to win in 2025. What you've just described is essentially saying like the customers are making more individualistic choices and dropping the group think that was happening in 2023.
Yeah, I think gradually. I'm not trying to overstate how much that is happening, but I think it's starting to happen more. So you're seeing more traction with point solutions as opposed to just we do everything for everybody. So I really do think as the dust settles on the winners, it's going to be how they are willing to approach their customers, not just, oh, we'll throw some AI on it and make everything better. It's like, how are we going to solve this problem that you do? Because some of these tools might not even do work that your firm does. So why, I mean, you don't need to care about those. I think it's
Yeah.
just beyond the, the excitement and the FOMO slowly. I'm not, again, not overstating.
Yeah, I think that the winners and losers will largely be separated by what are the features, what can be done, and how is the user experience on that. What is the UI and the
Mm.
UX? And the features go a long way, user experience goes a long way. And if you have both of those things, of course, that makes a winner product. And a lot of times, as you say, that's a point solution. But what if you were to do that not just as a point solution, but doing all the things, that is making lots of features and lots of
Yeah.
things for litigators and transactional lawyers and regulatory lawyers and advisory lawyers and.
Yeah.
So this question is, do I as a company kind of go narrow with a laser shot, or do I do all the things? And that's a discussion that Horace and I have had in the past. A lot of AI people want to do all the things because it's possible,
Yeah.
and others are going point solution. Horace, what do you think about such things?
I was having a debate with my engineers yesterday about this, and I think like it's so tempting in the world of Gen AI to say we can do all the things because you
Mhm.
can just use a different prompt with a different label, and suddenly you've solved a different problem. The challenge I think of that is one, marketing. How are you going to sell that to the market and be convincing that yes, you can solve those things? And two, how are you going to be able to bridge that last mile for your customers? Because Gen AI is going to give you a solution, they're going to give you some sort of answer, but it's not going to be a copy and paste. And if lawyers, I mean, I can't think about it this way. Like if I'm driving from here to Minneapolis, and this is where my American geography is going to be really, really bad. I don't want to be taken all the way down to Texas. Yes, I've gotten away from New York City, but it's not in the right direction. I have to now drive from Texas up to Minneapolis. But if you get me, say, to Pennsylvania, I'm on the way. I'm not as far as Texas, but I'm in the right direction. And so I think like to kind of bring that back to the product metaphor, a good user experience is you'll get me closer to the answer, not just move me forward.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about and spoken internally this last week with a bunch of people about personas. What the message is depends on the persona that you're speaking to. And there's substantive personas. Am I a transactional lawyer or a litigator or advisory lawyer or regulatory lawyer, bankruptcy lawyer, et cetera? But then there's also, do I write checks or am I a worker bee? Those are two different personas that might overlap. If you have a tool that is helpful to either the transactional lawyer or the litigator or the advisory lawyer, et cetera, and they don't write checks, that's a different message than if they do write checks. So really being able to say, who is your message to be able to simplify your product's idea to all the personas I just mentioned, and whether they write checks or don't write checks, that's a close to impossible task. Every time they say, what does Vincent do? I say, well, what do you do? Based on that, I can say, what can we do for you if you're a transactional lawyer? What can we do for you as a litigator? If you're a billable hour lawyer, then I'm probably not going to lead with, we're going to save you a lot of time, because that's going to say, wait, I'm going to spend money to make less money. Forget about it. But if you don't write checks and if you have a flat fee, then I'm going to say, hey, we can save you a lot of time. So the message really depends on what your substantive area expertise is as an x-axis, and the y-axis as to whether you write checks or don't write checks. What do you think of that kind of framing?
Well, I was going to add another persona dichotomy on there. It's always interesting to me how companies market their products and who they market them to, because you have the persona of the person who is like, I will try anything if you tell me if it makes my job easier. I'm all open to innovation. And then the personas that's like, and it's not necessarily even an age or generational thing. It's like, I figured out a way to do this. I don't want to change how I've always done it. This is how it works for me. So getting that person to try it is much harder than the first persona, right? And so when you're pitching your product to people, does it sound overly convoluted and techy? Does it sound like it's worth change even though you hate change? So I would just pat that as another dichotomy out there that you have to balance in terms of who you're trying to reach.
Z-axis.
See, to me, that's all too complicated. I simplify it way down and just go, okay, what is the job that you're doing and how does the software help you do that job? Discard the whole personas things, because like if and it doesn't work all the time, by the way. But what we then are able to do is to align the product, the language in the product, the workflow in the product to the users, to be able to say, well, this is a job you're doing. This will help you achieve that outcome. Personas to me have always been this kind of like, I can't design one product for two completely different personas.
And so the tricky part is that with us, we have 15 different workflows today, and we're cranking out dozens of workflows per quarter. And so the work that I do in your language, the work that I do is literally in the 50 or 60 things that you can do. Any of those tasks could be accommodated by those workflows. So as you expand your offerings to be able to have a catalog of 50 things that are at the ready is really hard. Hard for 50 tasks, easier to have 5 personas. Well, are you a litigator or a transactional person, right? Do you write checks or not write checks? That's the difficulty. But even then, are you a big law lawyer or a mid law lawyer or a small law lawyer?
I think a thing playing off of that, you were saying big law, small law. Looking back on 2024, this rise of the mid market, I think, is huge right now. I may have 5 minutes before we recorded this hit publish on a whole new collection of content for mid-sized law firms. But it's a thing I've been talking about for, I mean, at least since ABA Tech Show this year, earlier in the spring, that I feel like a lot of providers are coming at the mid-market from both sides. Like traditional big law vendors are hitting the mid-market. Traditional small law vendors are hitting the mid-market. And I mean, I have theories for why that is. It's largely being, I personally think the mid-market stands to benefit the most from Gen AI and other technologies and become
Yep.
competitive in a way they haven't been previously. So targeting that market or any market you haven't previously targeted, I think is interesting. I mean, I'm in the process of writing an article, and if anybody wants to reach out to me and give me their insights on this, about how you can straddle markets. Because I've heard people try to make the argument that one provider can't serve two markets. If you do big law, you don't understand mid law. If you do small law, you don't understand mid law. And enough providers are doing it successfully, at least so far it seems, that I think that's not true. But I'm really interested in that concept of expanding across personas or across markets. Are the needs that different?
Yeah, I guess the real question is, if I'm a Kirkland and Ellis lawyer and I take my whole silo within K&E and I go then jump to create a mid-law firm, is my work different than it was at K&E? And then if one of those lawyers jumps out and creates their solo firm, is their work different as a solo than it was in the mid, than it was at Kirkland and Ellis, right? So really the substantive work seems to be the same. I think the
Mhm.
differences probably are the buying cycle for a solo is lightning fast. Mid is a little bit slower, but still pretty fast. Big law, the sales cycle is forever, right? But substantive law probably absolutely the same, even though the buying cycles are different. What do you think, Horace, about mid law versus small versus big?
I think it's the allocation of time. Like a big law, you are specialized. When you are an M&A lawyer, you do 24/7 M&A. And I literally mean 24/7. When you're mid law, you might spend 10 hours of your day doing M&A, but then you got to spend 4 hours of your day doing trust accounting. You got to talk to your partners, organize your team, because you don't have a marketing team. You don't have these people that would take the specialized jobs off you. And then when you're small law, you're doing legal work for 6 hours a day. And then the rest of the time, you're hoping a piece of software like Clio is going to be able to manage your practice for you, because, geez, you really, really don't want to deal with all of that menial stuff that you've never had to do as a big law lawyer. So it's allocation of time. And I agree, substantively, the portion of time they spend doing legal work is the same, but it's everything around it to make it happen.
Which
Yeah.
again, I think goes to my argument anyway, that the mid-market stands to benefit a lot more than maybe big law. I mean, especially because, I mean, it's like the whole analogy of, turning a cruise ship also versus a motorboat. If you can get the money and implement this, like, you can scale so much more quickly and benefit from that. I don't want to spend 10 hours doing billing and timekeeping and trust accounting that I never had to do before. I want to still keep doing the reason I went to law school or became a lawyer. I want to keep doing that work. And I can take on the cases that traditionally needed an army of 15 associates that I didn't have. And, if they're worried about AI replacing lawyers, which we know it's not going to, but pretend that were true, the mid-market's not worried about that nearly as much because they don't have the ones to spare.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm going to add one more layer of complexity if I could. So another layer of this, Jay and Ed Sohn have talked about 3 layers. There's the cream, there's commodity, and then there's core. Whereas the
Yeah.
cream at the top is, I hire one of the AmLaw 10 law firms, not necessarily just for their substantive legal work, but also for their letterhead. That is, I'm going to avoid a shareholder lawsuit by hiring the best of the best. And that's the cream. And then, of course, there's commodity work that all of us know what commodity work is. A lot of the commodity work is going to be eaten by large language models. it's going to be brought in-house and consumers are going to do it themselves, right? So that commodity goes away. The cream's going to be just fine, right? Because you're still going to need to hire the letterhead to be able to satisfy the shareholders. The real question is the core that's being done. And you might think of this as big law at the cream and then small law at the commodity and mid law in the core, but that's kind of not necessarily true because big law does a lot of core things and mid law does a lot of cream things. Really, the question is how much of the core is going to get hollowed out? That is going to be pushed down to commodity with large language models. And then what percentage of the big law, mid law, and small law is core versus cream versus commodity? What do you think about the cream core commodity aspect?
I think mid law is coming for the cream, and I don't think big law is taking that threat seriously enough.
Mm.
I mean, there
Mm.
to a degree, there's always going to be, like you said. I mean, what's the saying? Like nobody gets fired for hiring cravath or
Hiring
something.
IBM.
Yeah. So I mean, there's to some degree, there's just for various reasons, there's going to be a certain amount of the cream that is always big law. But I think the mid market is becoming way more competitive in some of those areas, and especially the more niche areas of the cream, which is not like it's sounding very convoluted now. I think it will shift, especially as you said, more of the core becomes commodity.
And I think there's different flavors to mid-sized law firms. Like there are boutique firms that does big law work. And then there are mid-sized firms that are happy to do commoditized work because they can just churn and get lots of high volume revenue. My cousin recently left one of the big firms and opened up her own firm called Groombridge Woo, and it's like an IP litigation firm. She was telling me over lunch the other day that clients are seeking them out because of their big law pedigree, but because they're mid-sized boutique, they can do work that big law could not for a variety of reasons. This probably is not something that the big firms have thought about. As your Paul Weisses of the world is not looking across the road to the boutique firms, they're looking across the road to the Ropes and Gray and to whatever, and they're going, who's my threat? Who are my peer firms?
Yeah.
And I think it's a cycle, right? Because now as these mid-sized firms offer more advanced technology that lets you do higher quality work, it might be attracting talent it might not have previously been able to get. I mean, once upon a time, an AmLaw 10 associate probably wasn't going to consider going to a mid-sized firm, but now I think they're much more likely, especially, and this is another technology element, especially as they're more willing to keep flexibility and work-life balance. And big law is pushing return to office. It turns out people like working from home and are productive working from home. And if they're now going to get the same, it's not a trade-off anymore necessarily versus quality of life versus good work. You can get good work and quality of life in the mid-sized firm. That's really attractive, and it's going to be increasingly more attractive.
I agree. And if your competitors are your peer firms, then you're going to be competing by AmLaw rankings. And those AmLaw rankings relate to profits per partner, that sort of thing. So there's a race to the top to be able to say, what is my billable hour? To be able to increase my profits per partner, to be able to increase my AmLaw rankings. If I'm competing with my peer firms, that's what I'm chasing, rather than being able to say, what is my quality of life, as Stephanie just said. That is not a metric that I am chasing with my peer firms. I spoke with a friend of mine who is one of an AmLaw 10 law firm, and she said that my billable rate, my firm just said, is $2,600 an hour. She said, who is worth $2,600 per hour? But this is the chase of profits per partner, right? And she said, I could give a haircut, I could charge less than that, but then my realization rate would go away. If she or somebody else were to jump from that and go to a mid-sized firm, then of course she would be able to do the same work, maybe without the crazy billable hour, and be able to say, hey, I'm the same person as when I worked at this big law firm. And that's something that I think a lot of clients are saying, we can't hold our nose and pay these high rates anymore. Maybe we're going to go mid-size.
So do you think 2025, we're going to see a change in the buying patterns of clients? Do you think this is going to happen now, or do you think it's going to take more time? Do you think technology needs more time to brew? What are we expecting in the market?
Before I ask Stephanie that question, I would say that Yogi Berra said that predictions are hard, especially about the future. So we're doing the hard work of predicting the future. I would challenge everyone who is listening to this podcast to hold this up to our faces in December 31 of 2025 and say whether we got any of these predictions right, which we'll probably get wrong.
Yeah.
But you can only hold it up to our faces if you promise to buy us dinner.
That's right. That's right. I will happily be wrong if you buy me dinner. I would say that, yeah. So as we think about the buying ability of clients for 25, I think that we have 30 years of billable hours staying resilient, even though we said it's been dying, to be able to look back and say, if past is prelude for the future, that's not going to happen in 25. But what I think is going to happen is probably the 10% flat fee that a lot of law firms have and 90% of billable hour. That 10% of flat fee is going to grow maybe to 20%, to maybe 30, 40%, to maybe 50%. And how quickly in 25 that gets eked up is, of course, anybody's guess. I would say that 5 years from now, if that number isn't 60, 70, 80% a flat fee, I would be surprised. But what do you guys think on 25 as far as the buying habits of corporate clients?
I
Yeah.
will always be the first one to say that the billable hour is never going to die. I mean, that has no reflection on whether or not I want it to, but, I've been on stage and said it's like a cockroach. It's never going anywhere. That said, I think Gen AI and the new wave of technology, which is not all Gen AI, but I think spurred on by the Gen AI boom,
Mm.
will wound it a little bit more than it has in terms of the buying patterns. I don't know if 2025 will be early enough to actually see a change in the actual buying behavior. I think it'll shift the interest. I think people will be asked more questions and maybe
Mm.
suss out their options and maybe push for more change, but I don't think we'll see a significant change yet by the end of 2025.
So one more thing before Horace goes to the point about buyer behavior changing. There's also a lot of work that I've talked with a lot of in-house counsel that said they're just doing a lot of work in-house without going externally. So I guess I'm thinking about Horace's question: is that really changing buyer behavior or not? And I guess kind of it is, right? It's by not buying, that's buyer behavior, right? If they're just doing things in-house without calling their lawyers. And one example is that one of my customers said, every time I think about calling a lawyer, I just use your tool and then I get a really good answer and I move on with my day. So that lawyer doesn't know why the phone didn't ring. So in a sense, that is already buyer behavior changing, where that is legal spend
Mm.
that they considered but decided that it wasn't worth it to do. So I guess, Horace, what do you think about buyer behavior and whether it's going to change in 25?
Well, I think it will be slowly changing. But what you said was a perfect segue into the question that I was going to ask. So you almost kind of foretold what I was going to say. Do you think legal tech vendors are going to start pitching their software more to in-house than law firms in 2025? Because we had a big
Surge.
big surge. Oh gosh, thank you, Stephanie. I only had one drink over lunch too. A big surge of legal tech vendors who sold to law firms. I mean, I'll name a few: Harvey, Leia, all the platform players. And I feel like in-house teams were an afterthought for a lot of these platform companies that do Gen AI. And the CLMs kind of sprinkled on some Gen AI into their tools, but didn't fundamentally change anything. And I guess the question is, do you think this is a missed opportunity that vendors are going to start seizing on in 2025?
We are. I sell to the biggest law firms in the world. I sell to the biggest corporations in the world. I've spoken on other podcasts. Sorry, Horace, I'm not exclusive to you. We're polygamous in that way. But I've talked with Leo Mergel a couple of times from Salesforce, and he makes clear and he speaks publicly about the work that they're doing within Salesforce, being able to use smart tools to be able to do work better, faster, stronger. And he talks about how it's important for him to work with law firms that get it, that are able to say, we are not in 2020, the old world, as Stephanie said. Like we are in a new paradigm. He wants to work with people that get it. And same thing with Darth Vaughn from Ford. We are in a new world. If you don't use a large language model, you're fired. That we are only going to work with you. So I know that they are public. That is, Darth and Leo Mergel are public about this. I know there are so many people that are not public about it. I've spoken with them and they say, we just don't want to crow about it because we're going to freak out our lawyers, but we're just doing the work. We're not telling the lawyers that they're doing it. If they want to come on board and show us how they can do things better, faster, stronger with large language models, cool, but we're doing the work ourselves.
Scary thought. Stephanie.
No, I think it's an interesting opportunity. I hadn't really thought about it till you asked it, and I don't know if a lot of vendors have necessarily thought about it yet. But I mean, obviously, depending on what their tools do, not everything will be able to translate
Mm.
across the different organizations. But I do think, I mean, you are seeing the same way you're seeing people serve different markets. I've started to see some announcements, of, oh, we're expanding into law firms from corporate traditionally or
Mm.
vice versa. So I do think as providers hone specific use cases that they think they're really strong in, and those can translate across organization, they will, they should at least consider that option. And I do agree with what Damien said, that more in-house are looking to do things themselves. So that is a golden opportunity. What do you think, Horace?
So
You can't just ask the questions. You have to answer some too.
no. I'm going to move us right on to the next topic I have because we've only got a few minutes left, and then you can ask me offline what I think about all these things. So we've got a couple minutes left, and I want to give everyone a chance to say, hey, what do you think is the most exciting thing next year? And Stephanie will give you the final minute to talk about all the interesting content you've published in the last couple of weeks. So Damien, let's start with you to talk about what is the most exciting thing in 2025 for you.
I would say that we've talked on this podcast a lot about the merging of symbolic AI, the good old-fashioned AI, with neural net AI, and be able to say that the combination of those two things together is better than either of them separately, because the symbolic AI is deterministic and neural net is probabilistic. And so bringing determinism to probabilistic thing is probably the right thing to do. So I think that in 2025, we're going to see more of that merging. We're going to see more people tagging up things and be able to create knowledge graphs to be able to reason with their internal databases. And I'm really excited about what Soli, Mike Bomarito, and also John Scrutato and a bunch of other folks are building tools to be able to input any legal text, tag it up with Sally tags, and then be able to output well-tagged text. So anyway, so I'm excited about 25, people merging the symbolic and the neural net. Stephanie, what are you excited about 25?
I'm excited for literal mergers. I feel like the consolidation game in this industry it's hot right now. And even with all of the ones we've seen, every time you go to an exhibit hall, there's whispers of like, who do you think won't be here next year? Because there's just so many companies that seem to be doing the same thing. So, whether through acquisition or otherwise, they can't all succeed, but a lot of them are seeing some really good, successful exits. So I'm excited to see where that keeps going. And I think that coincides with people focusing on point solutions, and then they're merging into maybe the more platform approach. So I'm excited to see where that's going. I know agents are all the rage right now. It's like it's becoming the new hot word that everyone, it causes eye rolls, but I think eventually we'll get past the hype eye roll stage to some really cool things like the dust will settle on that too. And when it does, that's what I'm excited to see how it really plays out.
Well, I'm going to finish off with my thought, which is I'm excited about better user experience. I'm excited about applications where people are going to design these things to really fit the users. So with that, what should we say, Stephanie? What should people be reading?
Well, in my new role at Legaltech Hub, I am the director of content. And so, as that implies, we are rolling out all sorts of new content. It's always sort of been there in the works, but nobody with a dedicated role to corral it all. And I have a great team. So we just launched literally right before we hit record a whole collection of content aimed specifically at mid-sized law firms. Every week I do a column on something I'm seeing, and then a weekly watch list of items that, news items you might have missed. So just really trying to keep a pulse on what's going on, and just, a weekly check-in of what we're doing. And I will link to a lot of our other things too, but there's a lot of good, smart people putting out content here. So
awesome. To our audience, read Stephanie's things, because second to none. She's really puts out great things. These are exciting times, and she's letting you know about the exciting things going on. Horace, this was another great episode. It turns out if you have smart people on, they can say smart things, and it's really helpful to all of us. So thank you, both of you, for saying smart things.
Well, thank you. And I have to do no work. I just ask questions.
And we're going to grill you after this. That's what we want, your hard answers to these questions. But thank you to our audience for listening. Thank you to Horace and Stephanie for being smart people. See you all again soon.
See you soon.